Hi there. I've been thinking. Back when I was perhaps 6 years old, back in the UK, before my family migrated to Australia, I remember being on a bus trip to see my grandparents with my father. And I was looking out the window, and every time I saw a mini miner, particularly a red mini miner, I would point it out. I don't know why, but at some time in the days prior to that, the mini miner had been brought to my attention. Before that, before whatever brought it to my attention occurred, I really barely noticed mini miners at all. But once they've been brought to my attention, I saw them everywhere, and particularly red ones. I grew up in South Australia, and in Australia we have a holiday on the 25th of April called Anzac Day. And there was always, and probably still is, a persistent myth in Adelaide that it always rains on Anzac Day. It so happens that my father used to keep a journal, and in that journal he would record all the weather details for that day. I do not know why. But he would be able to tell you that sometimes it rained on Anzac Day, sometimes it didn't rain on Anzac Day. It's April in Adelaide, sometimes it rains. Statistically, there was no difference between the chance of it raining the day before Anzac Day or the day after Anzac Day. But this didn't stop the persistent myth that it always rains on Anzac Day. Of course, if it did rain on Anzac Day, then everyone would say, "Look, see, it always rains on Anzac Day." But if it didn't rain on Anzac Day, conveniently somehow that was always overlooked. As we go about our daily life, things inevitably happen to us. And sometimes they're bad things, or at least unpleasant things. Perhaps we have a minor car accident that day, for example. I don't know how many times people have said to me, after having had such an accident, that they had a feeling that was going to happen to them when they got into the car that morning. Of course, what people don't acknowledge is the number of times that they've had that feeling before when absolutely nothing has happened. They remember the one time when they had the feeling and it did happen. The coincidence of those two events becomes significant for them. Now, each of those things that I've mentioned there are examples of perception filters. During our daily lives, we see and hear certain things and don't see and hear other things. We filter out a lot of the stimuli, a lot of the input that's coming into us. And we have to do that because there's so much of it that if we didn't use those filters, we'd simply be overwhelmed by all that stimulus. And I think some forms of mental illness are in fact result from an inability to filter out all that extraneous stuff. And so we're simply overwhelmed with all that's pouring into us from the outside world. Of course, we need to do that. We need to do it to survive. But it also does potentially lead to some of our biases, some of our prejudices. For example, we learn to associate certain behaviors with certain groups, even though the same behavior may occur in other groups too. And some of the filters that we employ are not so unconscious. For example, we tend to choose sources of news which reinforce beliefs and prejudices that we already hold, and we avoid other sources. And social media actually helps to reinforce that because if you watch a YouTube video on kittens, you'll be bombarded with suggestions of other videos about kittens. If you listen to a track on Spotify, you'll be offered similar tracks to that, or even the same track again. So social media acts as a kind of external reinforcer of our already established prejudices and biases. No, we can't simply take off our perception filters. If we did that, we'd probably lose our minds. But we do need to be aware of them. We always need to have that little question mark in our minds. What am I missing here? What am I overlooking? What prejudices am I holding? What are my biases? And particularly so when we're making conscious decisions, for example, about what news service to watch. Maybe we've made the right decision for us. I'm not suggesting that we necessarily have to change it or that we necessarily have to expose ourselves to a news source that we don't trust. But we do need to be aware of the choice that we're making and acknowledge that to ourselves. As with so many things that I talk about here, it's about raising your consciousness and your awareness of what's going on in your mind, in the world around you. As always, what I'm really asking you to do is just think about it.